Mark Zanetto of Locked On UConn, hearing reports that UConn will join the Big 12 as a member of this conference. I want to flip the table a bit and give you the opportunity to ask the questions of how this affects the Big 12 from our side of things. What is the number one, what is top of mind for UConn when you think about joining the, quote, truck stop conference?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I think my biggest question to you, and when you get to Big 12 Media Day, maybe you can ask this question, even just for your own teams. The Big 12 is stacked with power programs, physical teams, Cincinnati's, Kansas, West Virginia, the travel, the absolute, beating each other up. It's like a heavyweight fight every game. If you look at some of these games, the spreads are like 4 or 5 for no matter whether you're the 12th team or the first team. How would UConn, or I should phrase it more like, why would UConn want to go to the Big 12 and have to play 16 to 18 quad one games and essentially kind of fall apart in the tournament because you're just beaten to crap?
There was a stretch there, Mark, where the Big 12 was dominating at the Final Four level, from Texas Tech going to the championship against Virginia, and then Kansas running the table. You look at the 2020 canceled season. I think Kansas with Azubuike or Baylor and what they had with Jared Butler and Macio Teague and everybody that was back in 2021 to help them win a championship. And Kansas in 22, there was a stretch there where it was the narrative that the Big 12 can't win in March because it's so tough in the regular season, and that narrative was completely canceled out. And the last 2 years haven't exactly reflected that. The Big 12 has been a bit of a flop in the postseason, but if you want to be in the best conference in college basketball, it's really not close. You ask Sportico, you ask Massey ratings, you ask anybody, and the Big 12's got the best conference in basketball, especially when teams like BYU became surprisingly competitive, or Cincinnati or UCF, who both missed the tournament but snuck up on teams like Kansas and pulled major upsets because they had pieces that were competitive and successful. Then the top of the conference, you already mentioned, there's Iowa State there. There's TCU there, who's so competitive now. Now, Arizona is in your conference, and you bring in the likes of Colorado, who's at least competitive last season. That's not to mention the Baylors, the Kansas of the world, and what they've given the conference for the last few years. And programs with history like Oklahoma State that have frankly sucked. But at the very least, they have the basketball is there. And maybe for me, and I know that I'm so interested to hear the questions that UConn would have. The one thing that I question on the Big 12 side, if it's adding UConn, is less so from a competitive nature what it adds to the conference, because obviously it does. The Big 12 having a UConn, having Gonzaga, is going to make basketball even better, and elite product somehow more elite. Then you go to revenue. You say, all right, you got the chops. Do you have the money to back it up? UConn is the only school in the country over the last couple of seasons that has spent more money on basketball than football and profited a lot more money off of basketball than football. And the EADA numbers from 2022, which gives you it's kind of, we work 2 years back when it comes to government numbers and revenue. And for UConn, I mean, they're in the thick of it with the Illinois, the Indianas, the Michigan States, the North Carolinas, when it comes to basketball revenue at $24 million per year. Then you look at a Syracuse at $34 million or a Duke at $45 million. And you say, hey, if you're the Big 12 and the ACC falls apart, why not add Duke? Why not add Syracuse, who actually make more money off of football than UConn does and could bring you more revenue? So I don't know if I even think about it from a competitive standpoint, more so than I do a revenue standpoint. How much money can UConn bring you?
Yeah, I also wonder too, just about if we take away, it's hard to take away money in college athletics these days, but if we look at the competitive landscape of the Big 12 from the Big 12's perspective, does it make sense to add another superpower to that mix? Where you're right, over from 2019 to 2022, they had a nice run where you had Kansas, Texas Tech. You mentioned all that, but last year, if you saw it, I mean, you had Bill Self go on, like actually say that he was already looking at next season because his team was hurt. I felt like they beat each other up to the point. Like I feel like even Iowa State, if they had beaten Illinois, they probably would have got beat by 30 against UConn in that team. That team looked exhausted after that Illinois game in the Sweet 16, and they barely lost. So it's just one of those things where I just wonder. I think some fans on our side would have that same thought process, but as far as like recruiting goes, do you feel like the conference footprint would be benefited by having a team in the Northeast? Is that something that is even thought of in your perspective?
Recruiting standpoint, the league itself is so sporadic now because you have UCF and you have BYU, you have West Virginia, and you have Colorado. So where you recruit and the hubs that you reach from, you don't see a ton of these schools going and grabbing a kid out of Chicago or the Chicago area in a high school setting. And you don't really see these schools going to Brooklyn and grabbing this kid from a high school and say, well, there's really good basketball. Instead, you're seeing a lot of, hey, what does IMG got for me? What does Link got for me? What does Sunrise Christian have for me? How do these prominent basketball prep programs give us star recruits in the conference? Baylor's doing that. Houston's doing that. Kansas is doing that. I think what you see more so now, just in the sport of basketball in general, is schools turning to the prep academies and the transfer portal and saying, look, I don't care where you went to high school, but you're a 3-year starter from Western Kentucky. You're a 2-year starter from Toledo. You're the MAC player of the year. You're the SoCon player of the year. You scored 26 points per game and shot 48% from three. We need you. We want that in our program. And maybe you're coming off the bench, but that's what recruiting seems to be now. More so portal focused, more so academy focused than it is necessarily regionally. And maybe UConn's seen a bit of that too.
For sure. They've had a lot of success over the last couple of years, picking a Tristan Newton from East Carolina, picking Cam Spencer from Rutgers. This year they got Aiden Mahaney from St. Mary's. So you're right. There's that stuff. There's definitely a part of it, but the strategic aspect of recruiting is still part of it. I wonder, I'll ask you one more question about the Big 12 and kind of the long-term vision. If this happens and we use that eminent word in the next couple of weeks, do you think that if this offer has already been made and they're working this all out behind the scenes, do you think that they see UConn as a strategic fit, like where they're betting on the football program being to a level that Kansas is at, to where Duke is at, where it could get to that point? Because UConn wasn't always in the doldrums of the football program. They were a good team in the Big East when Big East had football. This is it's 20 years ago, but in 2004, they were in the Fiesta Bowl, 2003 or 2004 in the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma. So it's not impossible for this to happen at UConn, where they're a competitive football program. Maybe, and hell, who knows? In 2003, they would have been in the college football playoff. That's how crazy this world is. Yeah. So if we were in the 12 team expanded playoff world that we're in now. So do you think that that's part of it, that they're looking at it as like, all right, UConn is already here on the basketball level. They're here at football. If we can just get them to about here and we bet on that, that's also going to add a ton of revenue as they kind of on the rise. Yeah.
More than necessarily looking at football, what Brett Yormark wants to do, the conference commissioner of the Big 12, is look at innovative ways to bring in money. And this would be a completely basketball move. It would almost be Yormark saying, I don't care about football at this point. You guys make a bulk of money in basketball. You're at now the last decade. I mean, it goes decades back that UConn's going to be successful at basketball. This reminds me a lot of, everybody bear with me, Florida State in football, Texas in football, Alabama in football. Those are programs that can suck for 5 years, suck for 7 years, 8 years, and still make money because people pour resources into those football programs. UConn basketball can suck for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and they are still going to bring in money in basketball because of the resources surrounding that program. That's what brings Brett Yormark's attention to that school. Less so football being even remotely competitive, and more so how can I make money off a product that Fox and NBC and ESPN want to be even more involved with moving forward. So a lot of it comes down to TV money and the TV money that basketball can bring in as these contracts expand. And the Big East is an example of how TV money in basketball can save a conference or save an entity. But I don't think UConn can do this alone. Let's move there next. Who else is coming with the Huskies? It's got to be somebody on Locked On Big 12 and Locked On UConn, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's August 20th. My rent is due in 11 days. And at FanDuel, I can say, hey, the Rays have been playing really well. The Texas Rangers have been winning games at some point. The Baltimore Orioles are fun. I would like to put money on them. And FanDuel says, okay, do it. That's what we're here for. FanDuel.com is your place to go right now for this is a one-of-a-kind offer. It is different. We've never done this before. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Yep. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. $5 bet. Now through September 22nd, you can bet $5 and get 3 weeks free of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Go to FanDuel.com/locked-on and download America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on. It's America's #1 sportsbook, and you can watch every NFL game coming to you very soon.